This is TWiT.
This was over on Vice's Motherboard publication by Joseph Cox, who we've had on the show in the past. And Joseph wrote a story about a way to take advantage of a flaw in SMS, the short message service, which is how most text messaging has worked in the past and continues to work for many folks. Those of us on iPhones, it's a little bit different. But because of this, hackers are able to take over phone numbers in mere minutes and do it in a way that's incredibly simple. The person who wrote this piece, Joseph Cox, he wrote it kind of starting out as a bit of an editorial with a really interesting story about how it was just talking with a colleague, and then suddenly he got screenshots from this hacker who had shown that a few of his accounts had been broken into. And then he got text messages he did not receive text messages. He had screenshots from the hacker who showed text messages that were supposed to be for Joseph Cox sent to the hacker instead. And typically, if we could cut back to me really quick, because I want to talk about the process here. There are multiple ways to go about doing kind of message-based hacking. And one of those is it involves kind of a social hacking technique where either you bribe or you work out a way to trick an employee who works for the person's cell carrier in order to get the number that's tied to the person's SIM card that's, either placed into the phone or is digitally part of the phone, transferred to the SIM card that you have, that you want to use. And with that process, there's a way to immediately tell that there's something going wrong. So if if Ant calls up AT&T and says, hey, and then does this very magical thing where somehow he convinces the person on the other side that this is legit and gets my number put onto his SIM card, then when I look at my phone, my signal is going to be gone. I can very easily tell that something has gone wrong, that, I no longer have access to my phone number. But that's what makes this new flaw, so insidious and so brilliant, because other than the fact that you're not receiving text messages, you wouldn't be able to tell that someone had done something wrong with your number. So I want to kind of go into some of the details here. It's not SIM swapping. It uses a system to reroute SMS messages through a company that is that is intended to be a way for businesses to set up text messaging with their company. So, for example, maybe you have a phone number that you've always had and you've got some stupid jingle that's been in commercials for years. And so everybody knows you call 877 cash now to get a hold of the.
Hold on, what was that number again?
877 cash now. You know that one. And so with that number, you may want to make it so that people could text it as well. And so these services let you do that. They basically they enable you to turn a number that you already have that's kind of set up through a different system into a number that can receive text messages. It also is for kind of SMS reminder services. So you may have, say, you buy a product and there's tracking information involved. And so you type in your number and then the company texts you to let you know how how long it takes for the package to get there, or a dentist's office that texts you to remind you that you need to go in for your cleaning. I get it. I know I need to go in for my cleaning. Anyway, so with that, there are all of these different systems in place, and it's kind of wild that this has not really been put out there before, that the people have not been made aware of this, because it's something that's been around for a while. It's just that the nefarious use of it is something that folks weren't necessarily aware of. So this is kind of the process. They went to this site called Sakari, and with a prepaid card, they spent $16 for the $16 a month plan, And then all they did was they took Joseph Cox's phone number and they put it into the system, and they filled out what's called a letter of authorization form, which is a form that basically says, I am who I say I am, or I have permission from the person who owns this phone number to use this phone number for this purpose. They just put some fake info into the letter of authorization form and then got approved to be able to reroute the text messages that were being sent to Joseph Cox's phone number. And using that, they gained access to the writer's Bumble, their WhatsApp account, which that's a big one. WhatsApp is a service that a lot of people use to communicate, and their Postmates account. And all it took was $16. The good news here is that Joseph Cox was working with this hacker to do this. And so it wasn't a surprise to him, and the hacker wasn't nefarious in doing it. It was just showing that it was possible so that it could be written about. But imagine, like, I don't know about you, Ant, but this makes me all the more cautious about ever letting my phone number be shown on our shows that we do, right? Yeah, ever. Because, yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts about this? Did you know that this kind of system was out there? Because all I knew about was SIM jacking, right?
That's all I knew about was the SIM jacking, and seeing this story previously on This Week in Google, wink, wink, show plug. We talked about this, and my question was, now that this is going on, well, actually, it's a couple questions. First, what's happening to this Sakari company now that they've been outed, if you will? Are they going to be responsible for tightening up their process and procedures for these approvals? Because it sounds like it could be a legitimate purpose, but if you're not doing any type of verification other than just filling out a random form, that's not cool. Then the next question is, take a look at the companies, the carriers such as AT&T, Verizon, or what have you. What kind of training is going on with their staff, their customer service team, that can go through and help limit stuff like this from happening? Because right now, a lot of those customer service representatives are working from home remotely. So we already know there's a different level of stress right there between making sure they're getting their job done throughout the day and keeping the bosses happy, as well as making sure the house isn't on fire because kids are running around, dogs are chewing on things behind them and things like that. So there's a little bit of added stress there. So things can start to slip when it comes to productivity. So I wonder what's happening between both of those parties there, and to help stop stuff like this from happening, because this is pretty daggum serious.
Yeah, incredibly serious. And in the piece, Cox notes it was a few minutes. It took a few minutes after Lucky 225 is the pseudonym for the hacker. And so Lucky 225 entered Cox's T-Mobile number into Sakari and then started receiving text messages. And there was no call, there was no text notification that let Cox know that this service was going to start being used. He just stopped getting texts. And what's interesting too is that Motherboard set up an account with Sakari to verify that the site was real and that it really did do this kind of thing. And they reached out to Sakari for comment, and then Sakari suspended their account on the service. So, I mean, to me, this just is like, are we just burying this? That this is a problem, that this exists, and that's wild to me. That's kind of terrifying to me, especially because you don't know what you don't know, and in this case, right, you wouldn't know that this is going wrong, other than my mom, I guess, emailing me to be like, are you not getting my text messages? And then me going, what do you mean? And then suddenly I would be more aware. Of course, that is where I think there is some benefit to services like iMessage, which are routed through Apple's own system. So as opposed to being over the SMS or MMS systems, it's just a data packet that's sent and delivered that way. So with my mom, that would not be the case. But if, Aunt, you tried to text me and someone had taken my message or had taken my phone number, then I would not get that and I would not know. If Jason, who let me know, that he was unwell, had tried to text me this morning and this had happened, I wouldn't know that you would have been filling in for him for TWiT Weekly through text messaging.
Now there's something even bigger with this though. Let's say that you were logging into your bank service to check on some deposits or what have you, and your bank says, okay, we need to verify this is you. We're sending a text message right now. Would you get that text message? Probably not.
Nope.
And that's not necessarily, in my opinion, that's not necessarily a problem with the cell service or the SMS system. That's a problem with the bank using SMS. The bank should use something else like a one-time password system that allows you to get in for additional authentication. That's something else that people aren't really taking into consideration these days because everything is done through SMS and messaging. I don't know about you, but if I ask someone to shoot me an email, people tend to look at me sideways like, what the heck is an email? Because yes. I hardly ever give out my number. I just don't, because I don't want to get random text messages. I'd rather let email do its thing and filter spam and stuff like that. But what are your thoughts on that particular procedure with merchants and banks and whatnot, just trying to authenticate you through SMS?
I mean, that's the big thing here is, and that's kind of what the Vice piece was writing about, is that, hey, this is something that is potentially dangerous because of the way that some services work to be able to reset passwords through text messages and things like that. So in that way, this is even more concerning than me just not receiving text messages from a person who I, haven't spoken to. The chat points out, it was going to be the next thing that I was going to mention, that this kind of service has been around, or this kind of service, this kind of flaw has been around for a while. It was back in 2018 when Lucky225 had originally been aware of it. However,
oh my goodness.
It was kind of the idea that, hey, even though Lucky225 had been aware of it back in 2018 and had kind of said some things about it, it wasn't widely known. And then about 3 days ago, Lucky225 wrote an article on Medium that then led to the Vice motherboard piece with Joseph Cox to kind of bring this to the forefront, to make this more known. So the reason why I wanted to bring up the piece that the chat room linked is because at the same time as this is a really important story, it also is a tiny bit some advertising for a company, and that is because Lucky225, the hacker, is the director of information at a place called Oki Systems. And the reason I want to bring that up is because Oki Systems is specifically designed to prevent this kind of thing. So a lot of times different folks in the technology realm will bring up kind of concerning things and you go, but what do you do to fix it? And sometimes we have fixes, sometimes we don't. Lucky225 working for Oki Systems does have a way to deal with this. And basically this is not me advocating for this service at all, but I thought it was interesting to talk about. You sign up for this service and it will basically watch your number, and it goes into that background of how this all works. It's a very complicated thing. And so even the Vice motherboard piece does not go into the nitty-gritty detail of the tech behind everything, but the Medium article from Lucky225 that's linked from the Vice piece does. And essentially, it's all because of the way that phone numbers work in relation to other places. So internationally, trying to tie a specific phone number to a specific person versus at the national level with your specific carriers, it's all different. And so there's a company called NetNumber, and NetNumber has a 6-digit code that kind of identifies the carrier that needs to route that number. And so just think of it like this. There are lots of different gatekeepers that exist in the SMS system and in the voice over IP system and in all these different systems. And you kind of, whenever you send a message, depending on where you send it to, it goes through all of these different places and has to be recognized as coming from you, or as opposed to coming from someone else, as opposed to, being globally, internationally from somebody else. And all these systems in place all are kind of using everybody else's technology to make it happen. So it's all just a mess. And you find this one way to wrap the message that's being sent in a different code, and then suddenly you're getting those text messages from somebody else. So I think it's because of the fact that the system in the background is very messy and is kind of glommed together that it's resulted in this being the case. But the Oki systems, what it does is it looks at that background system and monitors it. And then even though, Sakari does not let you know. Thank you. Sakari doesn't let you know that your number has been changed. This will. It watches that to see if it's been changed. So, yeah, even when Cox was asking for information about how this happens, Sakari said, well, we do this through another company, and then they contacted that company, and that company said, oh, well, we do this through this company. And then that company said, oh, well, we do that specific thing through this. And so it all just kept going to every other thing down the line. To B. Exactly. So it's hard to figure out kind of what's going on there and who ended up being at the root of it. So I don't know. Ultimately, I think that this is a really important piece, and folks should be. I've been pretty outside of. I try not to show it on video or anything like that, but outside of even that, I've been pretty free with my number in the past because it was not like I never use SMS as my two-factor if I can help it. And so there are only a few cases, and SIM jacking is a lot more involved, and so I felt pretty safe there. I've got protections in place with AT&T that go a little bit farther than the normal thing, and so I kind of felt pretty A-okay with that until now. And so I think people should be aware that you kind of do need to be more protective of your number if you're not, because of these systems.
I wonder what else we can do as technologists and tech commentators to help spread the word about better 2FA practices and to get rid of the whole SMS aspect of it. Because I try to discuss it here in the Pruitt household of password security as well as 2FA. And yeah, I still get those sideways looks like, oh man, will you please shut up and just let me log in the way I want to log in. But I really don't know what else that we can do to help, spread the word and get people to understand the severity of this. It's one of those things where I hate saying it, but sometimes it takes getting hit in the nose before you start to take things seriously. And if something happens to their account, then it might be too late,
And that's, you're absolutely right. That's the unfortunate thing about it is if you don't have a deep understanding of both the problem, the risk that you have, as well as the technology that you can use to help you mitigate that risk, then it's often the case that you don't have the activation energy required to make that happen. And so
I like activation energy.
So yeah, you can tell someone that here is what could happen if your password gets hacked, and they could feel that viscerally. But then whenever you show them what they need to do to mitigate that risk, then suddenly those two things start to balance out. Or maybe they feel like it's very little, they're not really pulled into the whole idea that it's a risk, but they feel like a password manager would actually just be a cool system to have or whatever. So, you know what I mean? Like, regardless, you have to get them to feel both of those things, to know and understand the risk and feel that it is a very critical thing, and then also know and understand a password manager or whatever system you're using enough to want to use that thing regularly. And if we can make the risk mitigation easier for folks, then you don't have to do as much of the convincing them of how risky it is, because that balance kind of is struck. And so for my partner, he's not a technologist at all, and kind of despises some technologies in certain ways. And I was able to finally get him using the password manager that's built into iOS, because it actually ended up being easier for him. Because what was his password before? It was that forgot password button that you hit every single friggin' time because he could never remember the password. So basically just going to the email where you choose to click here to reset your password. That was his login every single time. And
that's pretty
finally,
secure.
Right. So finally he kind of got tired of having to do that over and over again. And it turned out that having his phone and iPad and stuff just remember his password for him was a lot faster than doing that email thing, and was a lot less frustration. So that ended up balancing out where suddenly it wasn't so much work. But you are right that I think in some cases it really does take kind of the bad thing happening to be enough to strike that activation energy. And that's no good, as you say, because oftentimes then it's too late. But yeah, I think we'll all keep pondering on what's the right thing to do and how you convince people to take advantage. But ultimately, I think the best thing is to make that stuff as easy as possible to use and as difficult as possible to exploit. And that's an ongoing struggle.